Joining us here on the show is college football insider. The guy is all over it at CBS Sports HQ. He's awesome at cbssports.com. All over college football, our friend Barrett Sallee. Barrett, good morning. How you doing, man?
I'm good, D.A. How are you?
I'm doing great, brother. Thanks so much for joining us. We were talking about Chad Kelly and all the problems that he has had. Was this obvious? Should we have seen this coming down the pike, considering the problems he encountered at Clemson and then getting kicked out and Ole Miss and everything that happened in between?
I think it was a red flag for sure. I mean, it's crazy to think that he's been kicked off a high school team, a college team, and now a pro team. That's quite the trifecta. I think when Chad got to Ole Miss, by and large, he cleaned up his act. I think Hugh Freeze, for all the negative that Hugh Freeze, draws to his name, I think he did a pretty good job of personally helping out people on that roster that needed help, and I think Chad was probably the one that is most notable. So, I think if you're the Broncos or if you're an NFL team, I think you had to look at Chad and say, all right, great talent, has a bunch of red flags, but what is he right in the here and now? And coming out of college, I thought, and I think a lot of other people thought, he was a pretty good place personally. I think when it comes to this, I mean, he doesn't get a lot of strikes, and obviously one strike and you're out with the Broncos. It's hard for me to say, is this a trend or is this just a freak one-off thing? Because he really had cleaned up his act, off the field when he left Ole Miss. And beyond that, I don't even know.
Who do you give a better shot at taking down Alabama, or at least giving Alabama a game of the SEC? Is it coming up in 2 weeks against LSU, or is it that SEC title game that might have Georgia in it?
Oh, the SEC title game for sure. I think Alabama can beat LSU by 3 or 4 touchdowns. I think when it comes to the SEC championship game, Georgia is obviously a little hit or miss right now, but I think we've all seen what their top end is. I think they're working through some issues, specifically, at the linebacker spot. Their run defense has been a little spotty. And, there's a lot of young guys playing in those spots. So, I hate the cliche because every college coach says it, especially in the SEC. But when you get to the end of the season, those guys are playing like sophomores. They're playing like experienced guys. And those guys aren't there yet. So, but I think they can be. They've got the talent. They've got the foundation. I think by the end of the season, Georgia could potentially be, maybe not at Alabama's level, but certainly able to compete. I don't think LSU is anywhere close to being able to compete with with Alabama right now. They can't score 40 when they have to. They can score 40 when they want to, but they're going to have to score 40 when they have to against Alabama. And I don't see how that offense with a quarterback in Joe Burrow, who's done a pretty good job managing the game. He's made a couple clutch throws here and there. He's nowhere close to Tua Tagovailoa, and that offense for LSU, I think, is pretty one-dimensional. So I don't think they have much of a chance against Alabama.
CBS Sports college football analyst and insider Barrett Sallee is our guest this morning here on the show. Notre Dame has the record to be a top 4 team right now, but do you believe they're one of the 4 best teams of the country?
No, I don't believe they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. And that's a completely different, like you said, it's a completely different conversation than are they going to be a playoff team because the schedule is what it is. To me anyway, looking at what Notre Dame is, you've seen them squeak by a few teams here and there, Vandy, Pitt, they haven't looked great. But you go back and look when Ian Book was inserted as a starting quarterback. I hate to use a pun, but I think the book is out a little bit on him. You go back and look at how their offense has fared. It's gone down in production every week since Book got the starting job. And that's not to say he shouldn't have the job. He absolutely should. He's clearly the better option and clearly is able to keep that team, competitive in every game and winning every game so far. But I think when you look down the line, there aren't that many teams that can threaten, Notre Dame all that much, but Syracuse might be able to. USC might be able to. And when you look at the games that Notre Dame struggled with throughout the course of the season, it doesn't take much, in my mind anyway, to pick out a few here and there that can test them and possibly beat them. I mean, if Vandy can take them down to the wire and Pitt can take them down to the wire, then certainly some teams left on their schedule can. And, one bounce here, one bounce there, they can get knocked out. But like you said, it might not matter if they're one of the 4 best teams in the country right now because they certainly have one of the 4 best resumes right now.
Yeah, that Syracuse game's at Yankee Stadium, kind of neutral site, even though that's technically a Notre Dame home game, and that's at USC to end the season. So Still work to be done for the Irish. For the Clemson Tigers, they really feel like the second-best team in the country, but they have this rivalry with Florida State that'll come up at noon on Saturday. And the question is, what has happened to Willie Taggart's crew? They've kind of righted the ship. At least they're above 500 right now overall. But in your estimation, will Willie Taggart survive this season?
Oh yeah, he's not going to be one and done. I think Florida State, even though there'll be people that are upset and there are people that already are upset, they're going to give him a chance. I think that the biggest thing for Willie is I think he handled the offseason extremely bad. I think that he tried to sell himself and the program to the boosters rather than fixing the problems because. He said from the moment he got there that they had 85 guys looking in 85 different directions. And that was clear last year when Jimbo was there. And I think that he said all the right things, but he didn't actually address the problem. And so moving forward, I think Willie is certainly able to adapt. I mean, he was on the hot seat in South Florida, changed his offense, and parlayed that to the Oregon and now the Florida State job. He's not one and done. But right now they have massive issues from a personality standpoint, from a harmonious locker room standpoint, from an offensive line standpoint. So they'll give him the time. There's no doubt about it. But he needs to win next year for sure, and maybe show signs of life this year, not just towards the end of the season, but also on the recruiting trail, specifically along the offensive line, because the offensive line at Florida State has been flat out atrocious for about 5 years. And I thought they'd fix that with a coaching change and a new offensive line coach in there in place of Rick Trickett. And they have not fixed it at all. And that's not one of those things that you can really change during the course of the season. So once they fix that, once they sort of figure out their new identity, which they haven't figured out yet, I think they can be competitive, but it's not going to be this year.
The Pac-10 is always a jumble, and it used to at least be, okay, we can count on USC being great, or we can count on Oregon being great, or recently Washington being great, but this year we can't say any of that right now. If you just looked into that standings and said, I will take this team, this is the best football team of the conference, resume or record be damned, who is it?
Probably Washington State. Gardner Minshew's been awesome. And really, I think Mike Leach has found the right identity. They've got, 3-4 receivers that sort of excel in different areas. They use the screen game basically as their running game, and that's why Mike Leach says, hey, you know what, balance is overrated. You can achieve balance in a variety of different ways, and he uses that. He establishes that through the screen game. I think they're the biggest thing with Washington State, and I think you saw a little bit of that against Oregon last week. They've been stout along the offensive line and defensive line really for 2-3 years now, and I think that's a compliment to Mike Leach, because you go back and look at his Texas Tech days. Remember 2008 when they were in the national championship hunt? They had just absolute maulers along the offensive line, and I think it took a little while for him to build that on the Palouse. He finally has that. I think he had it last year, really had it 2 years ago when they were in the mix for the Pac-12 North Championship again. So I think he's figured out. I think it's Washington State, right? So it takes some time. But when you combine what he's got now with Gardner Minshew with what the offensive identity and the defensive identity is along the offensive line, along the line of scrimmage, then you've got a recipe for success. And so I think that's why when you look at Washington State, they're not going to get blown out. And in the Pac-12, you can say every other team can get blown out, and pretty much all of them have already. I don't think Washington State will, because the way they're built, they're going to stay in every game. And you look back at their one loss against USC, that was sort of a freak loss. I think they're a pretty good team, and I don't necessarily think they're outside of the college football playoff hunt yet, because if they win out and potentially get a rematch with USC in the Pac-12 title game and avenge that loss, that resume is going to look pretty good. So I don't think they need a ton of dominoes to fall. They certainly need a few, but they don't need a ton of dominoes to fall to get back in that mix.
Barrett, Sallee, CBS Sports College Football Insider. Finally, as a guy that has deep roots in Georgia, is there any time to eat Waffle House prior to 1 a.m.?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Any 24 hours a day,
wow.
365. Absolutely.
You're going to go lunch at Waffle House, just random Tuesday at noon.
Oh, my 7-year-old said, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to work at Waffle House because they have the best food. And he's not lying. But here's the thing. We have, one Waffle House per every square mile down here, right?
Yeah.
If you get a waffle at Waffle House, you're doing it way wrong. Texas bacon cheesesteak platter is the way to go.
Chicken, bacon,
Texas Texas bacon cheesesteak platter.
Texas bacon cheesesteak platter. That sounds
It'll change your life.
That sounds so aggressive, Barrett.
It'll change your life. Morning, noon, night, hangover, doesn't matter.
Okay. Check out Barrett Sallee on Twitter for the latest in college football at Barrett Sallee. All over CBS Sports, and watch him at CBS Sports HQ. It's always good to catch up, brother. Thanks so much for finding time for us today.
Absolutely, DA. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Barrett Sallee joining us this morning here on the show. Texas bacon cheesesteak? What was that he said? I need to delve into this deeper. I need to know what is into this